The most dangerous mistake isn't handcuffing an innocent person, it's handcuffing the one person who has the power to judge you. The first rays of morning sunlight spilled across the stone steps of Jefferson County Courthouse, painting the old granite building in shades of gold that almost disguised the weight of history resting within its walls. Lawyers hurried through the front entrance with leather briefcases tucked beneath their arms. Reporters adjusted camera tripods along the sidewalk. Witnesses rehearsed nervous testimonies under their breath. Another ordinary day in the American justice system had quietly begun. But within the next few minutes, everything that Courthouse believed about justice would be tested before anyone even reached the courtroom. Officer Ethan Brooks leaned against his patrol vehicle with the confidence of a man who believed his badge settled every argument before it even started. At 39 years old, Ethan had spent nearly 15 years wearing the same uniform. The polished badge on his chest reflected the morning light. His boots were spotless. His posture was rigid. People often described him as disciplined. Those who knew him better used different words. Arrogant. Impatient. Quick to judge. Especially when the person standing in front of him didn't look like someone he thought belonged. Traffic rolled steadily through the downtown streets while courthouse employees climbed the wide staircase carrying stacks of legal documents. A television crew prepared for coverage of a high-profile corruption trial scheduled to begin in less than 30 minutes. Security officers greeted familiar faces with polite nods. Everything appeared perfectly routine. Until Ethan noticed a quiet black woman walking alone toward the courthouse. She wasn't rushing like the attorneys. She wasn't carrying heavy case files like the clerks. She wore a tailored charcoal gray coat over a simple navy dress. Low heels clicked softly against the sidewalk with measured confidence. In one hand rested a slim leather portfolio. No jewelry except a modest silver watch. No attempt to attract attention. She simply walked. Calmly. Gracefully. As though she had absolutely nothing to prove. Her name was Naomi Carter. Her expression revealed almost nothing. Years of experience had taught her that silence often exposed more truth than confrontation ever could. She noticed Ethan watching her long before he spoke. She also noticed the subtle shift in his posture. The narrowed eyes. The skeptical expression. The assumption forming before a single word had been exchanged. Imagine walking toward your workplace knowing that someone has already decided who you are, simply by looking at your face. Naomi continued forward without changing her pace. She had endured those looks before. The curious glances. The silent questions. The invisible walls people built before hearing her voice. Most mornings, she simply walked through them. This morning would be different. Excuse me. Ethan stepped directly into her path. His tone wasn't polite. It wasn't aggressive either. It carried something colder. Authority mixed with suspicion. Naomi stopped. Good morning, officer. Her voice remained steady, almost gentle. Ethan studied her carefully. Mind telling me where you're headed? Naomi looked toward the courthouse entrance only a few yards away. To work. He glanced briefly at her portfolio before returning his attention to her face. What kind of work? A public position. The answer irritated him more than it should have. People answered simple questions with simple answers. Or at least, they usually did. I'll need something more specific. Naomi offered a small, respectful smile. I'll be inside shortly. Instead of stepping aside, Ethan moved even closer. Several pedestrians slowed their pace. A pair of law students exchanged uncertain looks. Across the street, one cameraman instinctively adjusted his lens toward the unfolding conversation. No one intervened. Not yet. Ethan folded his arms. You refusing to identify yourself? I haven't refused anything. Then identify yourself. Naomi paused for just a second. Not because she was afraid. Not because she lacked identification, but because she had suddenly become curious. Curious how far certainty could carry a person before it collapsed beneath its own weight. "I believe," she answered softly, "that this conversation doesn't need to become more difficult than it already is." To Ethan, those words sounded less like cooperation, and more like defiance. His jaw tightened. Behind them, the courthouse clock chimed once. 25 minutes remained before the morning session would begin. Inside the building, clerks were preparing a courtroom. Outside, justice was already being placed in handcuffs. Officer Ethan Brooks took one slow step forward until barely 2 feet separated them. "You've got two choices," he said, his voice carrying just far enough for nearby pedestrians to hear. "Show me your identification, or I'll assume you're refusing a lawful investigation." Naomi Carter met his eyes without the slightest hint of panic. "I understand your concern, officer." Her answer was calm. Too calm. There was no trembling voice. No angry protest. No desperate attempt to convince him. Just quiet composure. For reasons Ethan couldn't explain, that composure irritated him even more. People who had nothing to hide usually talked. They defended themselves. They argued. This woman simply stood there, holding her leather portfolio as if time itself wasn't moving around her. A courthouse security officer glanced toward the scene from the top of the steps, hesitating for only a second before being pulled away by another arriving visitor. 2 assistant district attorneys slowed their pace, exchanging uncertain looks before disappearing through the revolving doors. No one realized they were witnessing the first moments of something that would be discussed inside that courthouse for years. "You think you're above answering questions?" Ethan asked. "No," Naomi replied softly. "I believe every person deserves to be treated with fairness." The sentence lingered in the morning air. It wasn't confrontational. It wasn't sarcastic. Yet somehow it sounded like a lesson Ethan had no interest in learning. He folded his arms tighter. "Funny. Fairness starts with cooperation. I have been cooperative. You've been evasive." A television reporter standing across the plaza quietly signaled her cameraman to keep recording. They had arrived early to cover a corruption trial, but this unexpected confrontation was beginning to attract attention. Several courthouse employees gathered near the entrance. Some whispered. Others simply watched. None of them recognized Naomi immediately from this distance. Most judges arrived through a private entrance on busy trial mornings. Seeing one calmly standing outside in conversation with a patrol officer seemed ordinary enough. At least for the moment. Imagine standing in front of dozens of strangers while someone in authority slowly decides what kind of person you must be. Not because of what you've done. Not because of what you've said. But because they've already written the story in their mind. Naomi could almost feel those invisible assumptions settling over the crowd. She had experienced them before. In airports. Government buildings. Luxury hotels. Even courtrooms. Every time, the burden was the same. Prove that you belong. Ethan extended his hand. Identification. Naomi looked briefly toward the courthouse clock. 23 minutes until the morning docket. Inside courtroom 3, jurors would soon begin arriving. Clerks would prepare exhibits. Attorneys would organize opening statements. An entire courtroom was waiting for someone. Outside, however, that someone was still being treated as though she didn't belong there. "I'll ask one last time," Ethan warned. Naomi slowly lowered her eyes to her portfolio but made no move to open it. Instead, she spoke with remarkable gentleness. "Officer Brooks, are you absolutely certain you want to continue down this path?" The fact that she knew his name caught him off guard. Only for an instant. His expression hardened again. "You don't ask the questions here." Without another word, he reached for her wrist. The silver handcuffs hanging from his duty belt caught the morning sunlight. Around them, conversations stopped. The courthouse steps fell strangely quiet. Somewhere above the entrance, the courthouse bell echoed across the plaza. 22 minutes remained before the judge was expected to enter the courtroom. And at that exact moment, the woman scheduled to preside over the day's most important trial felt cold steel close around her wrist. The first cuff clicked shut with a sharp metallic snap that echoed across the courthouse plaza. For a brief moment, nobody moved. The sound itself seemed louder than the passing traffic, louder than the distant conversations, louder than the courthouse bell that had only seconds earlier announced another ordinary morning. Naomi Carter lowered her eyes toward the steel bracelet now secured around her wrist. Her breathing never changed. Her shoulders never tensed. She didn't pull away. She didn't raise her voice. She simply looked at the handcuff for a single quiet second before lifting her eyes back to Officer Ethan Brooks. "I would advise you," she said gently, "to think very carefully about what happens next." Ethan gave a short, humorless laugh. "You're in no position to give advice." He secured the second cuff around her other wrist with unnecessary force. Several people gasped. A young law student instinctively reached for her phone. An elderly man standing near the courthouse fountain removed his glasses as if he couldn't quite believe what he was witnessing. Yet no one stepped forward. Authority has a strange way of silencing crowds. People often assume that if someone wears the badge, they must know something everyone else doesn't. Imagine watching an innocent person being publicly humiliated while convincing yourself that surely there must be a reason. That quiet surrender of responsibility happens more often than anyone likes to admit. Naomi slowly adjusted her balance after the cuffs tightened around her wrists. Even now, she stood with remarkable dignity. Not because the situation wasn't humiliating. It was. Every curious glance, every whispered conversation, every camera pointed in her direction carried its own weight. But dignity is sometimes measured not by the absence of humiliation, but by the refusal to let humiliation define you. Across the plaza, courthouse reporter Melissa Grant quietly spoke into her microphone. "We're witnessing what appears to be a police detention outside Jefferson County Courthouse just minutes before today's corruption trial." Her cameraman zoomed closer. Neither of them recognized Naomi. Not yet. Ethan reached for Naomi's portfolio. "I'll be taking this." She released it without resistance. Inside were neatly organized legal papers, handwritten notes, and a slim leather notebook. He barely glanced inside before snapping it shut. "Nothing special," he muttered. If he had looked just a little longer, he might have noticed the embossed seal hidden beneath the folded documents. But certainty has a way of blinding people. Behind the courthouse's massive glass doors, Chief Court Clerk Rebecca Simmons checked the hallway clock. "Where's Judge Carter?" she asked. One of the judicial assistants frowned. "She always arrives early." Rebecca looked toward the courtroom entrance. The jurors had already begun checking in. Attorneys were organizing exhibits. The defendant sat quietly beside his legal team. Everything was ready. Everything, except the one person who could officially begin the proceedings. Outside, Ethan guided Naomi toward his patrol vehicle. "You'll explain everything downtown." Naomi looked briefly toward the courthouse entrance. "I was hoping today would be about justice." Ethan shrugged. "Today is about following the law." Naomi's expression softened almost imperceptibly. "There is a difference." Those 5 words settled heavily between them. For reasons he couldn't explain, Ethan suddenly felt a flicker of discomfort. Only a flicker. He ignored it. Behind them, courthouse staff started appearing near the entrance, scanning the crowded plaza with growing confusion. Rebecca Simmons stepped outside, shielding her eyes from the morning sun. She searched the sidewalk, the parking area, the arriving attorneys. Then her gaze stopped. Far across the plaza. On a calm black woman standing beside a patrol car. A woman wearing handcuffs. Rebecca's face instantly lost its color. "No," she whispered. "That can't be." Rebecca Simmons didn't hesitate. She rushed down the courthouse steps so quickly that a stack of files slipped from her arms, scattering across the polished stone walkway. "Officer," she shouted. Her voice cut through the morning air with an urgency that instantly drew every eye in the plaza. Ethan turned, annoyance flashing across his face. "This area is under police authority, ma'am. Stay back." Rebecca ignored the warning. Her breathing was uneven as she stared directly at Naomi, then at the handcuffs wrapped around her wrists. What are you doing?" Ethan frowned. "Conducting an investigation." Rebecca's expression shifted from confusion to disbelief. "Based on what?" "That's police business." A silence settled between them. Not the peaceful silence of an ordinary morning. The heavy silence that comes just before a truth forces its way into the open. Naomi remained perfectly still. She neither interrupted nor attempted to rescue herself from the situation unfolding around her. Her eyes briefly met Rebecca's. One almost invisible shake of her head. A quiet message. "Not yet." Rebecca understood. Years of working beside Judge Naomi Carter had taught her to recognize that calm expression. It was the look Naomi wore before making the most difficult decisions inside a courtroom. She wasn't afraid. She was observing. Across the plaza, more courthouse employees emerged from the building. Judicial Assistant Michael Turner stopped halfway down the steps. Court Bailiff Daniel Ortiz froze beside the security checkpoint. Neither of them spoke. Neither of them understood why Judge Carter was standing beside a patrol car in handcuffs. But both recognized her instantly. Whispers began moving through the growing crowd. "Isn't that? It can't be. What's happening?" The television camera captured every reaction. Melissa Grant lowered her microphone. Something about the atmosphere had changed. This no longer looked like an ordinary police stop. It looked like the beginning of something far bigger. Inside the courthouse, courtroom 3 continued filling with attorneys, jurors, and spectators. Defense counsel checked his watch. The prosecutor quietly asked the bailiff, "Has Judge Carter arrived yet?" The answer came with an uncertain shake of the head. "No, sir." The room grew increasingly restless. Outside, Ethan noticed the courthouse employees staring. He mistook their concern for interference. "If everyone would mind their own business," he said loudly, "this won't take long." Rebecca stepped forward again. Her voice remained controlled, though her hands trembled. "Officer Brooks. I strongly suggest you verify her identity." "I already asked." "And?" She refused to cooperate. Naomi spoke before Rebecca could continue. "I chose not to escalate." Ethan looked at her with open frustration. "That's one way to describe it." "No," Naomi answered softly. "It's the accurate way. Imagine knowing you could end a humiliating situation with a single sentence, yet remaining silent because sometimes the truth reveals more about others than about yourself." That was exactly what Naomi was doing. She wasn't testing Ethan. She was witnessing him. Every decision. Every assumption. Every unnecessary display of authority. One by one. Without interruption. The courthouse clock struck another minute. 19 minutes remained before the morning session. Rebecca reached into her jacket pocket with trembling fingers. She wasn't reaching for identification. She wasn't reaching for a phone. She was reaching for the official courtroom schedule bearing one unmistakable name at the top of the page. She looked down at it once. Then slowly raised her eyes toward Officer Ethan Brooks. The realization was becoming impossible to delay. Within moments, someone would have to tell him exactly who the woman in handcuffs really was. Rebecca Simmons held the courtroom schedule so tightly that the edges of the paper began to bend beneath her fingers. At the very top, printed in bold black letters, were the words everyone inside Jefferson County Courthouse had already seen that morning. Presiding Judge, the Honorable Naomi Carter. Rebecca looked from the page, to the woman standing in handcuffs, then back to Officer Ethan Brooks. Her heartbeat pounded in her ears. She knew she had only seconds to decide whether to interrupt or remain silent. Across the plaza, more courthouse staff had quietly gathered near the entrance. Court reporter Linda Hayes. Bailiff Daniel Ortiz. Judicial Assistant Michael Turner. None of them spoke. Each wore the same expression. Shock. Not because Judge Naomi Carter had been arrested. Because she hadn't corrected anyone. Imagine having the power to end your humiliation with a single sentence, yet choosing silence because you want the truth to reveal itself naturally. That kind of patience cannot be taught. It can only be earned. Officer Brooks noticed the growing crowd and mistook their silence for approval. He straightened his shoulders. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced confidently, "please step back. This is an active police matter." No one moved. No one argued. They simply watched. Rebecca took one careful step forward. "Officer Brooks." He barely looked at her. "I said stay back. You really need to verify. I've already verified everything I need." Rebecca glanced toward Naomi. The judge's expression remained unchanged. Calm. Composed. Patient. Almost impossibly patient. There wasn't anger in her eyes. There wasn't fear either. Only quiet observation. As though every word spoken, every decision made, was becoming part of a record no one else could yet see. Inside courtroom 3, the atmosphere had begun to change. Jurors whispered among themselves. The prosecutor checked his watch again. Defense attorneys exchanged puzzled looks. Finally, Bailiff Samuel Reed approached the clerk's desk. "We're supposed to begin in 15 minutes. Chief Deputy Clerk Angela Morris frowned. "Judge Carter has never been late. Never. Not once in 12 years on the bench." Outside, Ethan opened the rear door of his patrol vehicle. "You can explain yourself downtown." Naomi looked briefly toward the courthouse entrance. The people waiting inside deserve better. Ethan misunderstood her completely. "They'll survive a delay." Naomi lowered her eyes for a moment. "They've waited long enough for justice." The words lingered. Simple. Measured. Yet strangely unsettling. Officer Brooks felt that uncomfortable sensation again. A small voice in the back of his mind. Something wasn't adding up. Why wasn't she panicking? Why wasn't she demanding a lawyer? Why wasn't she begging someone in the crowd to help? Instead, she looked almost concerned. Not for herself. For everyone else. Rebecca could remain silent no longer. She lifted the courtroom schedule into the air. Her voice trembled as she called across the plaza. "Officer Brooks." This time he turned fully toward her. "You need to read this." He sighed impatiently. "I don't have time for courthouse paperwork." "It's not paperwork." Rebecca swallowed hard. "It's today's judicial assignment." For the first time since placing Naomi in handcuffs, a faint crease appeared across Ethan's forehead. He hesitated. Only for a second. Then he walked toward Rebecca, reached for the folded document, and glanced casually at the first page. His eyes moved across the heading. Then stopped. His expression remained unchanged, because he hadn't yet reached the name. One more line. Just one more line, and the certainty he had carried all morning was about to collide with the truth. Officer Ethan Brooks barely glanced at the document. His confidence remained untouched. Another courthouse form. Another piece of bureaucracy. Another interruption. He let out a quiet sigh before allowing his eyes to travel down the page. Jefferson County Courthouse. Morning criminal docket. Courtroom 3. His expression remained unchanged. Then his eyes reached the next line. Presiding Judge, the Honorable Naomi Carter. Everything stopped. Not around him. Inside him. For the first time that morning, the certainty that had guided every decision suddenly lost its foundation. He looked back at the woman standing quietly in handcuffs. Then back at the paper. Again. And again. No. The word escaped almost as a whisper. Rebecca Simmons watched the color slowly drain from his face. I tried to tell you. Ethan looked at Naomi. You. He couldn't finish the sentence. Naomi met his eyes with the same calm expression she had worn from the very beginning. There was no satisfaction. No anger. No triumphant smile. Only quiet dignity. Imagine realizing that every assumption you've made over the past 20 minutes has been witnessed by the very person entrusted to uphold justice. That realization doesn't arrive like thunder. It arrives in silence. Heavy. Unavoidable. Behind Ethan, the growing crowd began murmuring. Judge Carter. Oh my God. That's the judge. The whispers spread through the plaza faster than anyone could stop. Them. Melissa Grant lowered her microphone for a moment. Her cameraman never stopped recording. The story they had expected to cover inside the courthouse had just changed forever. Inside courtroom 3, Bailiff Samuel Reed's radio crackled. Judge Carter has been located. The prosecutor immediately stood. Where is she? Samuel hesitated. His answer barely rose above a whisper. Outside. No one expected what came next. Ethan's hands began trembling almost imperceptibly. He reached toward the handcuff key hanging from his duty belt. For the first time all morning, he wasn't acting out of authority. He was reacting to consequence. The apology caught in his throat. Naomi spoke before he could continue. Officer Brooks. Her voice remained gentle. Please don't rush. He froze. She continued. Take a deep breath. Those words confused everyone standing nearby. Why wasn't she demanding answers? Why wasn't she publicly humiliating him? Because that had never been her purpose. Justice was never about exchanging humiliation for humiliation. It was about exposing truth. Rebecca looked from Naomi to Ethan with disbelief. Even now. Judge Carter was trying to restore order. Not for herself. For everyone present. Naomi slowly raised her cuffed hands. Please remove these when you're ready. No accusation. No raised voice. No spectacle. Only grace. Ethan's fingers shook as he inserted the small key into the lock. The first cuff released with a soft metallic click. The sound was almost inaudible. Yet everyone heard it. Because it wasn't merely a handcuff opening. It was the sound of certainty breaking apart. As the second cuff fell away from Naomi's wrist, another sound echoed across the courthouse plaza. The deep wooden doors swung open. Every person standing on the courthouse steps instinctively turned. Walking through the entrance was Chief Justice Harold Whitmore, accompanied by senior court administrators. His eyes immediately settled on Naomi, then on the dangling handcuffs still hanging from Officer Brooks' hand. The silence that followed felt heavier than any verdict ever delivered inside the courthouse. Chief Justice Harold Whitmore stopped. Halfway down the courthouse steps. His eyes remained fixed on the open handcuffs dangling from Officer Ethan Brooks' trembling hand. The bustling courthouse fell into complete silence. No ringing phones. No hurried footsteps. Even the television crew lowered their voices. Some moments become history not because of what is said, but because no one knows what to say. Judge Carter. The Chief Justice's calm voice echoed across the plaza. He wasn't asking a question. He was acknowledging the obvious. Naomi Carter offered a respectful nod. "Good morning, Chief Justice." Her tone was exactly the same as it had been before the handcuffs, during the handcuffs, and after the handcuffs. Steady. Measured. Unshaken. Chief Justice Whitmore slowly descended the remaining steps until he stood beside her. Only then did he turn toward Officer Brooks. "What happened here?" The question carried no anger. That somehow made it even heavier. Ethan opened his mouth. Nothing came out. His training had prepared him for hostile suspects. For dangerous confrontations. For courtroom testimony. It had never prepared him for explaining why he had handcuffed the judge scheduled to preside over the county's highest-profile trial. He swallowed hard. "I believed." His voice disappeared. Chief Justice Whitmore didn't interrupt. He simply waited. Because truth often arrives more clearly when silence is allowed to do its work. Imagine being forced to hear your own assumptions before anyone else condemns them. That is sometimes the hardest judgment of all. Around them, courthouse employees quietly formed a respectful circle. No one celebrated. No one mocked Officer Brooks. Judge Carter herself had made that impossible. Her dignity had quietly shaped the behavior of everyone around her. Melissa Grant's cameraman continued recording every second. The lens captured Ethan's shaking hands, the Chief Justice's composed expression, and Naomi standing with perfect calm despite the faint red marks still visible on her wrists. Chief Justice Whitmore finally spoke again. "Judge Carter." "Yes, sir." "Were you injured?" Naomi looked briefly at the fading marks left by the cuffs. "No." "Were you treated disrespectfully?" A brief pause followed. Everyone leaned forward. This was the moment they expected her to expose everything. Instead, Naomi answered carefully. "I believe what happened deserves a full and impartial review. Not revenge. Not accusation. A review." Those words carried the weight of every principle she had spent her career defending. The Chief Justice gave a slow nod. "So noted." He then turned toward Rebecca Simmons. "Ensure every security recording from this plaza is preserved." "Yes, sir." "Notify Judicial Administration. Immediately. Advise Internal Affairs that this matter requires independent documentation." Again, no raised voices. No dramatic orders. Just procedure. Justice beginning exactly as it should. Officer Brooks lowered his eyes. For the first time that morning, he wasn't looking at Naomi Carter as a stranger. He was seeing the consequences of decisions made before facts were known. Naomi gently picked up the leather portfolio that had been returned to her. She smoothed one corner of the folder with quiet care before looking toward the courthouse entrance. "The jurors have been waiting." Chief Justice Whitmore glanced at his watch. "We can postpone the hearing." Naomi shook her head. "No." Her answer came without hesitation. "The people inside came seeking justice." She looked once toward Ethan. "They shouldn't lose faith in it because of one painful morning." Those words settled over the plaza like a final verdict. Not spoken from the bench, but lived in the moment. And as Judge Naomi Carter calmly walked toward the courthouse doors, every person watching understood that the greatest display of authority they had witnessed that morning had never come from a badge. It had come from grace. The heavy wooden courtroom doors closed softly behind Judge Naomi Carter. Outside, the plaza remained frozen in stunned silence. Inside, the rhythm of justice resumed. Every juror rose. Every attorney stood. Every spectator watched as Naomi walked steadily toward the bench with the same quiet dignity she had carried while standing in handcuffs only minutes before. Not one trace of bitterness appeared on her face. She placed her leather portfolio carefully on the polished oak bench before looking across the courtroom. "Please be seated." Her voice was calm. Professional. Exactly as it had been hundreds of times before. No one inside that room could have guessed what had happened just outside those doors. Imagine carrying humiliation into a courtroom, and refusing to let it influence a single decision you make. That is not weakness. That is discipline. Outside the courtroom, however, another process had already begun. Chief Justice Harold Whitmore stood beside Rebecca Simmons and two senior judicial administrators. Officer Ethan Brooks remained where he was, his patrol cap now resting quietly beneath his arm. He no longer looked like the confident officer who had stopped Naomi less than an hour earlier. He looked like a man replaying every decision in his mind. Internal Affairs Captain Denise Walker arrived with a small investigative team. No flashing lights. No dramatic confrontation. Just clipboards, evidence bags, and professional procedure. The plaza security footage has been secured, Rebecca informed her. The television crew also recorded the incident. Captain Walker nodded. We'll preserve every available recording. She then turned toward Ethan. Officer Brooks, your cooperation will be required throughout the review. He lowered his head slightly. I understand. There was no argument. No excuses. Only the quiet realization that facts would now speak louder than assumptions ever had. Across the plaza, courthouse employees slowly returned to their duties, though conversations remained subdued. Some looked toward the courtroom doors with admiration. Others glanced at Ethan with sympathy. Because while accountability was necessary, humiliation was not. That distinction mattered. It was the same distinction Judge Carter had protected with her own actions. Inside the courtroom, the corruption trial proceeded with remarkable precision. Witnesses testified. Evidence was presented. Objections were ruled upon. Anyone watching would have seen only a composed judge carefully applying the law. No one would have known that faint marks from handcuffs still rested beneath the sleeves of her judicial robe. Those marks remained hidden. Not because they were unimportant. But because Naomi believed the courtroom should never become a stage for personal grievances. Justice belonged to everyone. Not to her alone. Outside, Captain Walker closed her notebook after speaking briefly with several witnesses. She looked once toward the courthouse entrance before quietly saying, "This review isn't about protecting reputations." She paused. "It's about protecting public trust." Those words drifted across the nearly empty plaza. And for the first time that morning, Officer Ethan Brooks understood that the greatest consequence awaiting him was not public embarrassment. It was having to confront the difference between enforcing the law and truly serving justice. Several weeks passed. The headlines faded. Television cameras moved on. The crowd that had gathered outside Jefferson County Courthouse returned to their ordinary lives. But inside the justice system, the echoes of that morning remained impossible to ignore. The independent review had been completed. Every available security recording had been examined. Witness statements had been collected. Body camera footage had been synchronized with surveillance video from the courthouse entrance. The findings did not rely on rumors. They relied on facts. Procedures had not been followed as carefully as they should have been, and the incident became the subject of formal administrative action and additional training designed to reinforce impartial policing and proper identification protocols. Justice had taken its course. Not through revenge. Not through public humiliation. Through accountability. Officer Ethan Brooks no longer walked with the certainty that had once defined him. People expected anger. Some expected excuses. Others expected resentment. Instead, they saw something quieter. Reflection. He replayed that morning again and again. Not the moment everyone learned Judge Naomi Carter's title. The moment before that. The moment he had looked at another human being and believed he already knew her story. Imagine discovering that your greatest mistake wasn't breaking a rule. It was forgetting the dignity of the person standing in front of you. That realization changes a person long after the headlines disappear. Judge Naomi Carter never spoke publicly about the incident. She declined interviews. She refused television appearances. She never allowed her courtroom to become a stage for personal attention. When asked privately why she had remained so calm, her answer was remarkably simple. If the law asks people to trust it, she said, then those who serve it must be willing to trust the process themselves. Those words quietly spread throughout the courthouse. Young attorneys repeated them. Court clerks remembered them. Even veteran judges reflected on them. Because everyone understood that real authority had not been demonstrated by the badge, or by the robe. It had been demonstrated by character. Months later, visitors entering Jefferson County Courthouse would never know exactly where the incident had occurred. They would simply see the same broad stone steps, the same polished doors, the same American flag moving gently above the entrance. Ordinary places often carry extraordinary lessons. And perhaps that is how it should be. Because justice is not measured by the absence of mistakes. It is measured by what people choose to do after those mistakes are revealed. So the next time you see someone standing quietly in front of you, ask yourself one simple question. Am I seeing this person, or am I seeing only my assumptions? Sometimes the strongest voice in a courtroom is not the one that speaks the loudest. Sometimes it is the one that remains calm enough to let truth speak for itself. He believed authority came from the badge on his chest. She proved that true authority comes from fairness, restraint, and the courage to see every person with equal dignity. Because in the end, justice does not wear a uniform. Justice wears integrity.